Okay, cool. So we were saying, well, let's start with this table because I'm here. Well, let's do it this way. Who are you? What's your name? Where are we? Let's start like that.
Okay. My name's Robert Colom. I make movies here in Miami. I'm a writer too. We've known each other a long time, since like.
How do we meet?
We met in college in like some arts classes, some history classes kind of.
At FIU.
At FIU.
At FIU,
yeah. Yeah, we met at FIU. We've been friends for a while. What was the rest of the question? Where are we? This is my apartment. I've lived here for probably 9 years or something like that. This is a converted garage in the backyard of my parents' house. I live across the backyard from them, so my rent is rent controlled, which is amazing. And I'm protected from these like crazy, rent increases that are fucking making their way across the world, but especially across this town right now. It's like a little safe haven for me. My little sister, I'm 31, my little sister's 26, and she lives in an efficiency in my parents' house, which is in front of this house. My parents live there. Next door was my grandmother's house and the house that I grew up in before she died. She died last year, and my aunt sold the house because it was under her name, so it's not in the family anymore. But I grew up in that house and like climbing the trees in the backyard of that house, the house that's right next door to this house. And there was a railroad track right behind the apartment that they lifted a few years ago. More than a few years ago, maybe like 15 years ago, that we used to play around on and stuff, walk around. Now the railroad track is like, it's fenced in, so you can't really walk your dogs back there anymore unless your house has like a back access to it. My grandma's house was awesome. It was like the place where everybody converged and everybody like had parties. Noche Buena was there every year. There was like my grandfather built like a barbecue out of bricks, and like it was like a built-in cajachina back there. It was awesome. And next door to that house, my godfather lives there. So currently, yeah.
Oh, okay.
He's about to go in for his second knee replacement. He's great.
Yeah.
And he lives there. And behind his house, his daughter lives behind his house in an apartment kind of like this.
So this is the three lots that are next to each other here, and we're like, obviously I'm not gonna say your address, but we're like we're off of 67th Avenue and like between Coral Way and 16th Street, and this is in the southwest.
Right.
So it's like West Miami, right? This is West Miami, Boragino. And so,
West Miami is like technically West Miami is across the street. This is unincorporated Dade.
Oh, okay.
Which is called Coral Terrace.
Coral Terrace.
But now they're trying to rebrand the neighborhood. So like a year ago, we have these like parking signs put up here that I don't think are enforced. Yeah, there's like, you have to have a residential permit to park on the street here because they're trying to rebrand this area as West Gables.
Dude, you're the second person that told me that.
Yeah. Coral Gables is like this ritzy neighborhood that's like, you know what it is, but for the recording, whatever. It's this ritzy neighborhood that's like, very high property taxes, very pretty Spanish kind of style houses. And it's like a mile away from here, a mile east of here. And there's these new like 5 or 6 story apartment buildings that are like popping up right across the street from my house.
How long those buildings that have been popping up along 67th, how long would you say? Because for me they're really new, but I just got back a little while ago.
I don't know, because I also experience time differently, so I have no idea. Yo no tengo noción del tiempo, so it's like, it's tough. But I think probably like 5 or 6 years. But they keep naming them differently. I think maybe they might be selling to different companies, but they're currently called like, it was called Celeste or something like that, but now they're called whatever it is, and then the the caption of it is West Gables.
Yeah, that's like Little Havana now. Where me and Sonia were looking for apartments.
Bro, in West Brickell, you were looking in West Brickell.
Exactly. Yeah, if it's not West Brickell, quote unquote, it's steps from Brickell. I'm like, bro.
That's what they're calling it, steps from Brickell.
Yeah, that's a couple steps. Like, you know what I mean. You gotta go under the 95. You gotta go in a little bit. But we actually ended up getting a place in the roads now that we just signed for.
No way.
$2,000.
An apartment?
Yeah.
A 1-bedroom?
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah, but it's gonna be fine. I mean, like, you know, you just gotta rise to the occasion. What are you gonna do? You know, you have to survive. But actually, the apartment's pretty dope.
That's not horrible.
No, and well, you don't think so?
Well, considering how everything else is, I mean, I hate to talk about the rent on this interview because that's what I talk about every single day, you know. But like, you know, despite being in this, like, you know, safe haven or whatever, like, noticing the rents going up is crazy. Like, my boyfriend last year, he was, what happened? Oh, it's me.
Yeah.
My boyfriend last year, he moved into a new place, and he had to bid on the rent. I had no idea that was
crazy.
I had never heard about that before. Like, the rent, it was a 1-bedroom apartment by Dadeland. It was $1,650.
Okay.
And the realtor, first of all, he needed to get a realtor because he couldn't find anything on his own.
Right.
The realtor, he went to look at the place, was like, if you don't offer the landlord $1,700, you're not going to get this place. So he had to put in a bid to pay $1,700 a month.
Let me tell you, that means that it's changing. Stuff's going down. First of all, we've been looking for like a month, and we've seen just in that month stuff go down. And even when we would go look at stuff, that you know, they would always tell us like, oh, it's like $1,950, but we'll leave it at $1,850. The place was $21. Oh, we'll leave it at $2,000 because it seems to be falling. You have to take that.
Yeah, pause it for a second.
Yeah.
Hello.
Resume. Okay, and by the way, so like, all this stuff is totally fine in the recording because essentially, like, this is an unstructured conversation that does have some kind of grounding. So like, we've talked about a couple of things so far, but like, essentially, I have this triangle.
Yeah. And
I'll present everyone with this triangle, but one point of the triangle is you, as in the interviewee, and that one is, I think, the most complex. So even though it's like inevitable, we'll focus on it last. Another point on the triangle is the Caribbean, and the third point on the triangle is Miami. And so we're exploring each of the points individually, but as well, we want to talk about the relations, the lines in between those points. The relation of, in this case, Robert to the Caribbean, Robert to Miami, the relation of Miami to the Caribbean, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And, you know, we've already touched on a couple of things, but originally when we started recording, I had some questions about this table. I wanted to take a photograph of this table that's right in front of us. It's made out of like 2x4s. There's a sheet of plywood on top, nails, some screws, but it seems like mostly nails. But in any case, it's a table you have here, and I mean, to me, it's really recognizable. There's also other furniture that's homemade here, and to me, it's really recognizable because growing up, this is how, like, my dad made basically all of our furniture in our house, and so, you know, I mean, he put a little bit more work than this table in this case. But, you know, structurally, it's a table. It does what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't have any, like, varnish. And it's, I mean, yeah, it has been sanded a little bit.
It's very rough.
It's rough. But, you know, it's actually a nice table. And you also, throughout your apartment, you have other stuff. You have una virgen de la caridad de cobre. You have, as well, like, these little Post-its everywhere. That have these words in Haitian Kreyol because you happen to be learning that. So, let's start with the place. I mean, you just told me this like mini family history, but tell me about this table, and then we'll move to these Post-its and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, this house, you know, I have this like theory about like my like the place that I live, where I want someone to be able to walk in here that doesn't know me and then walk out and feel like they know me without ever having met me. So that's why I have a lot of like things. I like, it's weird because I don't really consider myself to be like materialistic, but I have a lot of like material things because all these things are things that like represent me. So when you walk into my place, you see like a bunch of DVDs, like you see like books out, and everything's out, because I'm also like, in terms of like the way that my memory works, like my memory is so bad that if I don't see something out in the open, I don't know that it's there. So like there's things in these white cabinets that I have no idea what's in there, because I never opened them.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen them open.
So everything's out, and I have a lot of stuff. This table is like a good example of like the things that I like to keep around in my life, and the energy that I like to keep in my life. Because it's actually not supposed to be a coffee table. Clearly, it's very ugly, and it's like shabbily made. Yeah, I don't know if that's a term, but whatever. My grandfather made this table for la secadora at my grandma's house, so that she wouldn't have to bend down all the way to the floor to put in the clothes.
Was it a side loading one or a top loader?
Side. So the lavadora was the top loader, which was fine because she could reach that one. But the secadora was a front loading drying machine. And it was on top of this like piece of wood. So this was like something that he made like to help her, do
it's
her
about like
chores.
a foot tall, a little bit more.
Yeah,
maybe.
yeah, it's like a foot tall, I think. Here, I just happen to
God,
have a little cinta that I made here. Yeah, it's exactly a foot. And like when I just told you the story of like, we had to move everything out of that house last year. And La Virgen was one of the things that I was able to keep, which is my grandmother, my grandfather's Virgen de la Caridad sculpture, which they had since they got married, basically. And this table was another thing, like kind of on the opposite side of like the style spectrum, like, but they both hold like just as nostalgic a value to me. So it's ugly and it's dirty, but it's just like made by someone that I really love, and kind of like gives me a tie to a place that I came up in, even though it's like right across, it's like right next door. It's like it doesn't really belong to us anymore, which is an interesting maybe way into the rest of this conversation. And I assume that kind of feeling is going to come up more and more as we talk to like the relationships between the cities and our relationship to both like the place that we come from and the place that we were born in and the place that we now live.
Well, say more about that. Like what, because you talked about this place here that you no longer own, and you still have a connection to it. And I mean, where do you think that fits in this conversation?
I mean, it's a microcosm of like the separation that like we have had to endure as like migrants, obviously on a much smaller scale. There's not like a mass exodus, but I also have made a couple movies about like leaving places, and all my work is like very place oriented, and if you see it like looking for some kind of a nostalgic connection, you'll find it. It's not very hidden in the stuff that I make either. So I always have, I guess I'm like drawn to like things that remind me of or help me understand and process like this like concept of leaving a place.
Can I interrupt for a second?
You can.
Yeah. So this idea of leaving, that's very present, to the point where you say that like you've made movies about this.
Yeah.
And nostalgia and leaving, but you were born in Miami, right?
Yeah.
And you live in Miami.
I do.
And same for me, right? Like born and raised, whatever, like it's no secret. So I'm so curious to know this feeling of leaving, where it comes from, because I happen to know that the movies you're talking about have to do, at least in one case, with Cuba.
Yeah.
And obviously that's a part of the Caribbean. And we've already mentioned the Caridad de Cobre, and your grandparents were from Cuba.
Yeah.
Correct? And so is that where you tell me, where does this feeling of loss come from? Is it a personal feeling? Is it something that, well, I'll just stop there. You tell me about it. Yeah.
I don't know if it's loss so much as like transformation and like kind of like rebirth, but maybe like even a forced rebirth. I don't know, I think I'm like, I get I definitely grew up with like imagined, and also like this other film that I'm making now, you know, Mountains, which is about like you know, Haitian immigrants living in Little Haiti, which is another place that's disappearing. So like it comes up a lot in my work, yeah, I think it's like, you know, almost like a forced rebirth, you know, but that's kind of like, and to speak to my perception of time a little bit too, like, you know, I kind of like witness time based on the way that things change around us.
Right.
Also like I grew up with an imagined heritage, because like being from the Caribbean, like we can't really just, you know, depending on our situation, but like I haven't really been able to just like take an ancestry test and have it tell me like where I've come from. So I had to, as an adult, I've had to kind of like imagine what my what my ancestry is, because nobody really knows after, you know, 3 generations back.
Can I ask what is it that makes it such a mystery? Like, what are the things that you see or hear and you're just like, and you know, this speak more about this, like, this imagined heritage, you said?
Yeah.
Because obviously you've inherited things from very real people.
Yeah.
Right? We just talked about this table came from a real flesh and blood person, and you know, there's obviously a generation of flesh and blood people between you and that person, and you're a flesh and blood person.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just so curious, like, what is the mystery? What is
Yeah. Okay. So, you know, the biggest example of this is like the way that I was raised. Spanish was my first language. I learned English in school. My grandparents didn't speak English, and they were primarily the people that raised me alongside my mom and my dad. Mostly my mom's parents were, gave me a lot of these like characteristics that I didn't know I was like building when I was a kid. But they kind of like imbued in me like an appreciation for different cultural milestones, like different pieces of like our shared like cultural heritage, right? So for example, like I love I'm like a student of like Cuban music and like jazz standards from like the 30s, 40s, 50s, like mambo music, like all this stuff, that when you listen to it now, it's almost it feels like so ephemeral, because it's of an era that not only I am 2 generations removed from, but also like it's kind of like the tangible aspect of all this stuff, all this music, all these films, whatever, like were kind of left behind and cast into our collective past as like a place that doesn't really exist anymore. So obviously like a lot of countries in the Caribbean, like Cuba had a very turbulent revolution 60 years ago, and that political point was, in my experience, like the way that I experienced history, is there was like it's like a touchstone, right? There was like a before that and there's an after that. It's like and everything that happened before, I don't know anyone that's alive really that can still recount it to me. And even if they could, the way that my grandparents did, there's only so much of it that you can trust because of the way that memory like inherently works, So like, I don't know, man. I think a lot about like when you look at a photograph, there's this great there's these like great liner notes on the first Fleet Foxes album, which is like he talks about like the way that his memory works, and it was the first time I was like, oh fuck, this is crazy. I really relate to that. And like he has these really vivid memories of like he's wearing a red sweater and he's like playing in the snow, and he like knows exactly the color of everything and the shape of everything. And then he finds a photograph in his like mom's photo drawer or something like that, and it's exactly the memory. And he starts to question like, damn, it must be that I've seen this picture and I recreated the memory in my mind based around the photograph, you know. So it's like I question memory a lot, and I am also fascinated by it, and I also think that it's false. Like it tricks you, kind of. You tend to only remember the, you know, the very good or the very bad things that happen to you. I don't know. That's how my mind works, not necessarily like the mundane everyday things. And so I think when you remember your like this like whole life that you left behind, and this whole like, you know, this whole past that you've just kind of like, you know, it's out of reach, but there are still like these things in the form of, you know, like cultural items of cultural production, like music, films, you know, the statues like this one, that you cling on to. You create a new narrative for yourself based around all of those things. So that's kind of why I was talking about like there being an imagined past and not really coming from anywhere, because the place that I came from was a place that I never experienced firsthand, but it was a place that was recounted to me based on someone's memory of it. And that person's memory, you know, it's truthful, but is it factual? I don't know, you know?
No, yeah, I get you. It's like it sounds like, you know, like when you know, how did we get here? How did I get here? Even if you're just thinking that, which ties in, I think, to what you're saying about like this ancestry thing and the mystery of like.
And there's so much romance in it too. Like you think back and it's romantic to think about how, you know, beautiful things were, how good things were, you know, whatever that may be.
And because you haven't said it, what is that rupture point of the before and after?
What do you mean?
So as you're talking about this, you talk about like a before and an after, and like that moment changes everything. And I just want to know if you think that moment that separates before and after is like the Cuban Revolution, or is it migration, or is it someone's death, or
that's the thing. I don't know, because all those things are so like inextricably linked. You know, they happen so quickly, like in such quick succession. Like the Cuban Revolution happens in December 1959. My grandparents migrated they weren't in the first few waves that migrated. They came in 1966, you know, so it was like 5 years later, 6 years later, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I mean, these are the kind of things that I can't, you know, from like my place in history, I can't really tell you like specifically what that like breaking point is, what that before and after point is, because from my experience, you know, there's been, in terms of like migration, I came into the picture when everything was already settled, you know. So, you know, hence I think those things kind of blend together. Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Yeah. And so obviously you think a lot about Cuba, right? Like, I mean, if you study the music, you have this like historical, or you're maybe historical, right? But definitely like a narrative that's coming from memory, right? That you have. And the reason I bring this up is because I have a professor at his name is Dr. Abaca, and he talks about diaspora, and he's like, you know, a diaspora really is like it's like a circular motion. He's like, a diaspora is when you have someone in a different place that's constantly thinking about the place that they're not,
right,
and potentially returning to that place, and like creating this cycle of memory. And the way I think about it is like it spreads the other place to wherever you are.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, especially in Miami, you have enough people doing that.
It's very apparent here.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about that, this diaspora in Miami.
Well, that's fucked because we came over here and we kind of like, there's this narrative, especially with Cuban people, that like we kind of built the city. You know, it was, and I'm also developing like this TV show about Miami in 1978, which I think is like a really interesting time in the city because it's right before the Mariel boat lift happens. It's right before like drugs take over the city, and there's this concept of Miami as like the newest American big city. And I think like the late 70s kind of has been an interesting framework to look at it in that way because I feel like that's just when Miami was starting to spark into a big town, but it's also the time where Miami was changing from being like the newest American city into the capital of Latin America, which is what I feel like it, you know, it is now.
Yeah.
Basically.
How come?
I think that everyone lives here, you know, like everyone from every Latin American and Caribbean country, like they're represented here. Like everyone, you can go to a neighborhood that's little blank, and it's like every Latin country, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
All of us are here. So, you know, I think that Miami became like a place of refuge for a lot of people that, you know, in mid-century and forward, you know, were experiencing strife in their country. Everybody kind of ended up here. It's interesting because, well, not just here, obviously, but like, you know, we're everywhere. But, you know, I think that Miami's an interesting place because there's some places you go in this town and you can't get service if you don't speak Spanish or if you don't speak Creole, you know?
Yeah.
So, you know, we kind of like nos apoderamos de esta ciudad.
Yeah.
You know, y la hicimos nuestra. And that's super interesting to me because, and I don't know a lot about like how specifically that happened, but as I you know, keep doing research for the show and developing that idea, I'm sure I'll like start to do oral histories like this and try to figure out exactly what happened and how, like to who. But there's like a very real concept of like this being, I mean, I grew up in Westchester before. My parents' house was in Westchester, which is like in front of Tropical Park, like 2 miles away from here, 2 miles west of here.
That's where the house was? So like off Bird and like in the 80s basically?
Yeah, basically.
Southwest?
Yeah, like 29th and 80th. That's where I lived. And between there and here, because this was my grandma's house. But my across the street neighbors were unos gringos viejísimos.
Yeah.
You know, like my buddy Paul, like tenía 80 años. Like I ended up inheriting like all of his. He was my buddy, dude. Like I would go over his house and he would tell me stories and stuff about how he came here and how he'd traveled the world and where he was from.
Or where was he from?
He was from here, but he was from up north. But then they ended up migrating here, and that, you know, he would tell me stories that like that house on 80th, like when they bought it, like across the street was still like the swamp, basically.
There wasn't a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, I mean the way that like Chrome Avenue was 15 years ago, because now it's super populated too.
Yeah.
That's how he would describe like 80th Avenue, you know, or like 87th Avenue.
Yeah.
Which is like right here. So I ended up inheriting all of Paul's like family photographs and like some trinkets and stuff. He was a florist. He was awesome.
Wow.
But
this is a white guy.
White guy.
Was he the only white guy on the block?
Yes.
Yeah.
But old.
Yeah.
But
well,
old.
He had to be. That's
yeah,
the thing,
old.
Right?
So, you know, and his wife Pat, you know, who was like 15 years younger than him or something like that.
Yeah.
Otra gringa más de Virginia o no sé de dónde vinieron esa gente, no me acuerdo.
Yeah.
Pero, you know, it was like, it was really interesting to talk to him about that stuff and see And they would say like slightly off color things to my mom, and about like like preferential racism, kind of like.
What's that? Break that down.
I guess like it's like there's an actual real term for it that I don't know. Exceptionalism, I don't know, but it's like, oh, you're not like them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So my best friend Sandeep gets a lot of that stuff. He's from India, and he lives here in Miami. He's my best friend in the world, and he loves white people. I don't know really why. I think he just has a lot of like he's very aspirational, and that's very beautiful. That's one of the reasons I love him. But he has like all these like white friends who live in other places, and he goes to their house for Thanksgiving and Christmas and holidays and stuff, and he's told me that, but he hasn't colored this in a negative way. When he tells me about it, he says it to me as a positive thing. Like, he's like the person that's bringing change to these people's lives by being an example of like a good immigrant, you know what I mean? Anyway, this is getting off topic, but he people tell him like that all the time, of stuff like, oh, but you're not like other Indian people. People have a conception of like what that's like for some reason, even though they haven't lived it.
What kind of experiences like have you had being out of Miami? Have you experienced anything?
Oh, it was with you. The first time it ever happened to me, I was with you.
What happened?
We went to a conference in Boston.
Oh, with Bailey.
Remember with Bailey?
Yeah. Well, okay. I think I know what you're gonna say. Yeah.
I mean, it was like the.
We were in our undergraduate, so this was like.
We must have been 20.
Yeah, something like that, because this would have been around 2011, 12, or 13.
Yeah.
11, 12, around there.
Yeah.
We went to Boston for a conference. Go ahead.
And it was I had been out of the city before. I had been to Las Vegas. I had been to all around Florida, but I was kind of too young to really know or pick up on like any kind of like social cues in the way that I'm about to describe. Mm-hmm. But when we were in Boston, we went because we had both written papers. You had written a paper with your partner, and I had written a paper with my partner, and we submitted these papers to like present at this National Collegiate Honors Council. We went to the Honors College at FIU, whatever. Mm-hmm. So every honors college has this like, they get together and they jerk themselves off once a year, and it's in a different place, it's in a different city, every time, and the students present papers and teachers present papers. We were both presenting different papers. And I walked into the room, everything was fine, we're on the plane, it's fine, we're in the hotel, it's fine. We walk into the National Collegiate Honors Council, and it's like everyone's translucent. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? Yeah, and there was 4 students from a black college somewhere, mm-hmm. and us who were all kind of in the middle. Mm-hmm. We're like brown colored, like paper bag colored people. There's the 4 of us, those 4 black kids, and everyone else is super white. And that was kind of the first time that I was like, I remember having a conversation with you, I think on the train or something like that, or on a bus or something, about like, and with Maya and with Susan, about like how, what the fuck, I don't understand affirmative action. Like, I don't get it. I was being really Republican-y about it. Mm-hmm. And because I never had to understand it. And then when I walked into that room, the day after we had that conversation, I was like, okay, I got it. So this is how I imagine like Miami in the 60s, to be that room, and then suddenly the 4 of us come in, and then it's 8 of us, and then it's 12 of us, and then it's 16 of us, and then it's fucking 100,000 of us. Right. You know what I mean? So I think that's why I really like this place too, because it allows you to kind of like exercise all these ideas. And it's like it's like a place of experimentation, the way that I think the Caribbean is too.
What kind of experimentation are you talking about?
There's so many different kinds, but the kind that kind of like I think about most often, I think, is how do you, it's what you were just saying about, that what your professor was saying about the diaspora and bringing the diaspora with you and kind of like going back. And I think that Miami is a place that we have like established how to commodify our own culture back to us, which is so interesting, and like such an interesting experiment, and that I think about all the time.
You said we found a way to commodify our own culture
to
ourselves.
Like we package it and we sell it back to ourselves.
Like what's an example of that?
Like Little Havana is a great example of that, because it's like a plastic, it's very like plasticky tourist destination now. I mean, for Christ's sake, it's like the stop on one of those like double-decker buses,
Yeah. Which
so which like, I think that I used to complain a lot about Miami not being like a historical enough town, in the way that like Boston or New York or any of those like New England kind of towns are, where you kind of walk around and you can kind of feel that blood was fucking spilled on these cobblestones. You know what I mean? Like it's just like the history like rises up from the streets of DC. Like you can't walk around the streets of DC and be like, this is brand new. But here I used to be really confused because it was such a new place, and so many people are imprinting their identity on it all the time that it's constantly changing, which is really doesn't do anything to help my like kind of like fucked up relationship to change and leaving a place. Because you say I've lived in Miami my whole life, but I leave Miami and come back every day, and it's a different town, because it changes all the time.
I agree. Wynwood is an insane example of that.
Yeah.
I mean, just like, yeah, it was I remember it in like the early thousands. Used to be around there a lot, and just going less and less over the years. Obviously, I moved away, but I'm just bringing this up to say that I was there a couple of weeks ago, and I was eating at a restaurant that was 100% a house. A house like 5 years ago. Not only was the restaurant I was eating at a house, but all the restaurants that were beside the restaurant I was at were houses. And
but you mean the structure? Like you were in a house, or the structure was demolished and now it's a restaurant? The structure was
completely demolished.
Yeah.
They built up something there, like a huge. To me, it almost looked like a warehouse kind of that they subdivided for multiple businesses.
Yeah.
But and there were towers like coming up right on 2nd Avenue, which is definitely not something that was there before. And it's just and I picked up a friend who was visiting from Pittsburgh, who was really from Atlanta, who's an Ivorian person of his parents are from Ivory Coast.
Yeah.
And but I was picking him up, and he was like, "Yeah, pick me up at a sweet green or tender green or whatever the
salad place.
The salad place.
Yeah.
On 2nd and 26th. And when I rolled up, it was the middle of the day, and like it still had all those Miami elements, like the fucked up concrete, like the sidewalk, the lip of the sidewalk is always like, like if something had taken a chunk out of it.
Yeah.
And then like, they have the graffiti, like not the sanctioned one on the wall, but the stuff on the floor.
Yeah.
And like just all of that, and then it's got that general gray ratio of like that light bright gray kind of to the sky, and and then there's cops around, so like there are elements that are very familiar, but then all of a sudden you just the people that are walking around,
they're not from here.
Not only are they not from here, but they're walking around in such a way with such comfort with an area that like everything changes, like you say, but that 10 years ago would not have lent itself to that kind of comfort, and they wouldn't have had anywhere to walk anyway.
It's true.
You know what I mean? I would have been like, Biscayne's really far that way, and not only that, but it's funny what you say about like this lack of history, or the feeling of a lack of history. And so what do you think about it now? because you used to complain about it and you go and you come back and it changes. Like, what do you think of Miami as a place as it is today in 2022?
Ugh. That's probably the most complicated question that you'll ask me in this entire interview. I mean,
wait.
Just wait. No, but it is. I mean, Miami is such a complicated place, you know. I hate when people talk shit about Miami that aren't from here, or that are from here and didn't choose to stay here and live here. Mm-hmm. Like, I can talk shit about it.
Yeah,
but you can't talk shit.
You're in the trenches.
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's what they say.
You can't say shit because, you know, you left or whatever. Not you, but... You know.
Yeah, I got you.
What was the question?
What do you feel about the state of the city right now? Like, in terms of... You were telling me before I interrupted you with the thing about the windward. About how, like, we found a way, we being, like, I guess, Cuban descent people... had found a way to, like, sell ourselves back to ourselves through stuff like Little Havana.
Yeah. I think not just Cuban people, but yeah.
Not what other people?
Well, a lot of, like, Latin American and Caribbean, like, people have found pockets for ourselves in town, you know, and are, like, capitalizing on this, like, you know, nostalgia, demand for nostalgia, like people in, you know, from Venezuela, people from Mexico, but I think it's also just like there's this like thirst to like bring, to not lose your culture and bring it over with you, which I think is so beautiful. You know, like that's the complicated part about it, because I think it's kind of like, it's gross when it goes too far, but it's beautiful if you think about it as like something that's fighting against assimilation, or, you know, just battling against, you know, we're like fighting this country to keep our own heritage alive.
What is it about the country that we're fighting to keep our heritage alive?
You know, I think when people come over to the United States, there's this unspoken goal of like being American, right? And like finding your, you know, chasing the dream or whatever. And like living in a house and moving away from your folks, and, you know, getting a good like office job, and like, you know, or starting a business, and, you know, affording everything, you know, just like the picket fence stuff that we grew up like that this country like exports, and like, you know, just by circumstance I like combat stuff like that all the time, in terms of like, you've seen that like that image of like the way that the square footage has changed over time, like where it's like the more square footage you have, the further people are from each other, and then you move away, and then, you know, you just become more isolated. I think that like us, you know, there's something to, you know, some of us that is really driven to follow that kind of like isolationist, you know, goal, and then there's something in you know, another side of us that, or another set of us that like chooses to like cling to the way that, you know, that things are done in our countries, which is like, you know, you live in your parents' house until you get married, and then when you get married, your wife moves in with you, and then, you know, then like you have your kids there, and then you just, you know, and there's more people in a smaller place, but, you know, it's beautiful, and that's what it is. I don't know, Yoán, like fighting against this like machine that wants to like, you know, make us homogenous, I guess.
Homogenous, but of course, when you say homogenous, like, you mean homogenous in a particular way. It's not like we're not fighting a machine that wants to make us all black, for example, right?
Right.
And so, like, you know, and this is where I have a lot of personal interest in this, because I really wonder about the people who are, you know, when I was describing this project to classmates, everyone was like, well, what's your hang up with Miamians? You know, like, why do you want to interview them? And in particular, like, how do you define that? And it's like, I would interview anyone who lives in Miami, right? Because if you live here, you're here. Something's going to affect you. And something that's going to happen to you just by being here is going to be relevant, I think, to the discussion of here. And so, like, you know, there might be someone who's been here for 10 days and they're like, oh shit, I need to learn Spanish. So, you know, I want to hear about those experiences. But the reason that I'm so interested in the Miamians is because, like, I'm so curious in how we define ourselves as people who were formed in a place that I personally think is unique, that I think that you've been describing to me as different from the, quote, other places that Cubans ended up, let's say, that you mentioned. And here we're starting to get into it, which is this idea of, like, resisting this homogenous image. And so, like, and you already touched on this when you talked about leaving Miami and going to Boston. And you were like, okay, well, there was this room full of white people, and then there was some black kids from a black college from somewhere, and then there was us, who was like you, me, Maya, and Susan, was it? Okay, so that's people of Cuban, Colombian descent, Colombian descent, and Peruvian descent. And you said that that we were, like, in this, like, brown middle section. And so, and you also drew a line when you talked about Pat, right? And I know what you're talking about because I also have a white neighbor from even though he's, like, I think he might have been from Georgia originally, but, like, he went to South Miami High. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So he's been here.
Right.
You know, like, he was here when they opened the school, I think, something like that.
Yeah.
And but anyway, like, so when I left Miami and all these things, like, these discussions always came up, and, like, but anyway, my question is, like, how do you define yourself? Like, you know, here obviously there's us, and then there's Americanos, right? And Americano, correct me if I'm wrong, or just tell me what you think that word means, but it usually sounds like, you know, white people. Yeah. You know, specifically, like, these Anglo people, whatever, blah, 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 who essentially don't share our culture, right? Even though, you know, that you having been born here, you might, in the U.S., you might be like, oh yeah, los Americanos. Yeah. You know, even though, like, in some way you qualify for that. You know what I mean? But it's a really complex issue. So my question is about, like, self-identification, and, like, we could go, and I think it ties back to your original question about ancestry. So just tell me what you think about, like, how do you self-identify? Obviously, it's a very difficult question. Yeah. You know? But tell me how you don't self-identify, I guess. You know? Empezamos por ahí, right?
I guess that's an easier... No, las ponen dura, to be honest with you. Yeah. And you know, to have a conversation about, like, race in Miami is complicated. To have a conversation about whiteness in Miami is really interesting and just as complicated, you know, very, very complex. First, like, I don't know if I've told you, but somebody told me once, or I don't know where I picked this up, but it's one of my favorites, like, sayings about the city is, you know, someone was like, oh, I love Miami because of how close it is to the United States. Did I ever tell you that?
My dad told me a joke that a Jamaican guy told him. It was very similar, but this is a sentiment that comes up like over and over again. Like, the joke that the guy told my dad was, like, the best damn thing about Miami is that it's so damn close to America.
It's so close to America.
Yeah. And then, like, when they used to market Miami back in the early 1900s, they would call it the Porch of America. Wow. You know? And so, like, but to me personally, it's actually, like, I see it the other way. You know, it's the ports of the Caribbean. You know, but that's just, you know, that's just me, like, you know, leaking ideas here. But I don't think that you're like, you know, the main reason that I thought of you first when I was like, who am I gonna start to interview? Because, you know, I got like grandmas on this list, I got people on this list.
You know a lot of people.
But not only that, I just like, it's not that I know a lot of people, it's that I'm open to meeting lots of people.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so, like, and I think everyone is, like I just told you, if you spend 10 minutes here, it would be good to interview you. But the priority's for Miamians, because it's like you were formed here, so, you know, your perspective is going to be the most enmeshed, embedded in whatever this city is, you know? You're going to have basically the most, like, feelings about Miami, I think, you know? And, but what you've told me is that they're tied to other places as well, which is super interesting. And, damn, I lost my train of thought now. But you were saying that it's really close to America.
Well, I think your question was, like, you were trying to get into, like, how I identify, and I think we were, like, teetering around this, like, racial question, maybe, and, like, proximity to whiteness and all that stuff.
Yeah, I remember now. I definitely want to come back to this racial question. But no, the reason I picked you is because I was like, or picked you. The reason I chose to ask you, you know what I'm saying? Is because I think that we're very similar in a particularly unique way, which is that the way that you speak Spanish and the way that I speak Spanish lends itself to confusion for other people.
Yeah, it's true.
Who they're like, you know, people are like, I don't understand. Are you from here? Or are you from there?
Right.
Because there's like this ability to sound native in both.
Yeah.
And in fact, like, if you ask me to be native in both, that it just kind of like, you know, I feel native in both. And I think that you feel native in both. Like, you know, if I had, like, I know if I'm talking to you, I can use like a certain vocabulary set that I can't use with other people, let's say.
Yeah.
You know? And I don't know if that's been your experience with other people, like,
absolutely.
Es lo mismo con with music and stuff like that, like, you know.
But with everything, I mean, I say all the time how difficult it is for me to talk to somebody that's not bilingual, English, Spanish bilingual, because a lot of the time I don't even realize what language I'm speaking, because you know, sometimes if I just need to express myself, like, both of those languages are so, like, and I'm sure this happens with a lot of multilingual people, but it's like they're so, like, I feel in both languages, I think in both languages, I dream in both languages, so it's like, you know, sometimes I'm saying something and I don't even know in what language it's coming out.
Right.
And this, like, well, you know, it's complicated, Yoán, because this, like, issue of, like, feeling native and being native of both places is tough, because you know, I might have like a Cuban accent, but when I go to Cuba, it's like, you know, it's obviously not, it's different, you know. And also, like, to go back to what we were talking about before, like, when I go to, like, my idioms, like the sayings that I use day to day and the slang that I use from day to day is from, like, that BC period. Right, you know what I mean? Right. So I'll go to Cuba now and I'll say... I'll go to Cuba now and I'll say some crazy shit that people over there haven't heard for 50 years. You know? And they'll be like, what the fuck era are you from, you know?
Damn,
you know,
that joke came on a telegram. Bro.
Right, for real. It's in Morse code or whatever.
Yeah.
Y de madre. And, you know, there's also, like, you know, to speak to this commodification or to how maybe it's not commodification, maybe it's preservation, and I'm just experiencing that way because I pay money for the Aparejedes records. But, you know, like, I grew up listening to all this, like, all those comedy records. I mean, I have 30 of those comedy records, you know. And, like, you know, that's my language. Like, that's my formative understanding of, like, my culture. And it's very specific because all those albums were recorded here in Miami, Like the, you know, Que Pasa USA was made here in Miami. Like, that's my life, you know. Yeah. That's not like the life of a Cuban Caribbean person. That's like the life of like a Cuban person here, which is so, it's another interesting thing to catch me now in 2022, almost 2023, living here and being 31 years old in this time, because like I said, I'm a product of a city that had already been cemented and an identity that had already been cemented, you know? There's a lot of people like us. I mean, we might not know a lot of people like us, but I know for a fact that there are, you know, folks that came up under our similar circumstances than us. And I find myself in a weird position often. I don't know if you do too, because older people come up and tell, and even my cousins who are my same age come up and that have emigrated recently from Cuba or from Venezuela or from Mexico, whatever, come up to me and tell me like, ay, el español tú lo hablas tan bien, yo no entiendo cómo tú no naciste en el canal, porque el español tú lo hablas como si fueras de ta 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 ta. And I'm like, you know, like, it makes me feel kind of uncomfortable, because I'm like, it's basically what they're implying is that there's been like a loss of that, or that other people in my generation, like, somehow they're saying that I like have cared more, you know, to like keep that, you know, which in reality, like, I don't really know I can really take responsibility for that because of the way that I came up. But then again, the thing that all these people are citing are like, yeah, but look at Periquito Pérez or look at Mengano, and, you know, they don't speak the same as you, and they were born here in the same time, and they took the same Spanish classes, and their grandparents don't speak English either, and they could barely get a sentence out or whatever.
Yeah.
It just makes me feel weird because it puts me in the middle of this like value judgment that I'm not super clear, like what the like extent of the judgment is, and also like the reason that this conversation is coming up, you know?
Right.
Because it's so natural to my experience to be this way and to know these languages and to speak and express myself in the way that I do and to identify in the way that I do. And we'll go back to your question about identity in a second, because I know that was 30 minutes ago. You probably want to get to it. But it makes me feel weird that someone's putting a value judgment on me, and, you know, like putting my cultural identity on a pedestal, kind of, just because I've like lived my life, you know?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question. Like, back to these post-its that you have, right, with the Kreyol.
Yeah.
And you're working on this movie called Mountains, about like essentially the gentrification or the change or the disappearance of Little Haiti, and like it's obviously there's more going on. But I'm really curious about how you said that the person you work with, her name is Monica, and is she from here too?
Yeah, my co-writer, we wrote the film together. I'm producing the movie, and Monica directed the movie. Her name's Monica Sorrell. She is Haitian, born in Miami too, grew up in a totally different part of Miami. She grew up in Little Haiti and then in North Miami. This is the opposite side of the city.
Exactly.
We have similar experiences though in terms of like our relationship to our past and our culture.
So this is exactly, not only am I interested in how her experiences mirror your experiences, but as two Miamians, I'm very interested in how you guys relate to each other. And so, like, you know, you talk about, oh, well, I speak English, I speak Spanish, and whatever comes out, comes out. I'm just expressing myself. I would imagine, but I want you to tell me that as you picking up on some of these words or maybe some phrases, like, do you like, ever use them around her?
I do.
So like, can you give me an example? Because to me it would sound, when I see people that I know that are Haitian, like musicians and stuff that I know that I came up with and stuff like that, when I learn something in Haitian Kreyol, I just want to use it with them.
Yeah.
And no one is any type of way about it, in the sense of like, well, you can't say that, like there's no boundary drawing, which is what I think you're saying about English and Spanish. You're like, you know, when someone asks you, like, well, you speak it so well, how's this possible, whatever, like, it's kind of like implying, like, you're supposed to speak this so that I can do this. But you're up in here doing both. And, you know, like, where does that leave me? You know, maybe that's the other thing. But the way I see it is, like, okay, you have English and Spanish, and then you have an interest in this Creole because you acknowledge there are people who speak Creole around you, and you just naturally use it. And it seems to me like other Miamians naturally would not shut you down. You know, they're not gonna be like, don't do that.
You'll be surprised.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, my cousin the other day, like, my cousin's a very recent immigrant to Miami, like a few months. And you know, I'm like on Duolingo every day, like trying to learn Creole. I've had like a 300-day streak or something like that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, I'm so proud. And you know, I'm not fluent, but I'm learning, like, you know, and my vocabulary is very limited, but like, I'm just still learning, and sometimes he'll see me and I'll be like on my phone, you know, and he'll be like, "Deja eso ya, viejo. When are you gonna use that?" And I'm like, okay, you know what? First of all, pump the brakes. You just got here. You know what I mean?
To reiterate, not to cut you off, but he's not a Miamian.
He is now.
Well, okay, he's moved here. Yeah. But you said he just
came from Cuba.
From Cuba.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like...
But this is the culture shock of here, right? Like, I don't think he has the conception that, like, fully a third of the population here speaks this language, you know?
Meaning Kreyol.
Yeah, Kreyol. Yeah, Haitian Kreyol. Yeah, right. So, you know, but then there's also, like, there's this attitude of, like, why are you... And also not just from him, by the way. There's this attitude of, like, why are you learning that? Like, you don't need to.
Do you think it's anti-black?
Fucking for sure it's anti-black. Are you kidding me?
I just gotta phrase it like this.
Yeah.
You know, like the undercurrents that are, like, missed by, like, the exchange of a glance. You know, I'd say.
Right. Okay, for the recording, yes. It's definitely anti-black, for sure. We, you know, you and I know that. Something somebody told me a couple years ago, because I just started learning Creole because they just made it available.
Yes.
On the app, like, very recently. Yep. And the first day I was on the shit, but I've been trying to learn Creole for years. I went to, like, the, you know, Little Haiti Cultural Complex, and I signed up for, like, some classes, like some beginner Creole literacy classes. And when I got there, the lady was like, "Oh, sweetie, no, this is not for you. This is for people that speak Creole that don't know how to read and write Creole." And I was like, "Oh, but I'm just trying to, like, I just want to be, like, a beginner." Like, you know, she was like, "We don't have that." So, you know...
So it was like a literacy class.
It was a literacy class, which is a whole other thing, which is so interesting. But, God, where was I going with this?
But what drives you to learn it? Like, what was it that made you want to learn
it? So here's this other thing. What I was going to say, somebody else told me a couple years ago when I mentioned, like, oh, you know, I'm trying to learn Creole. And, bro, Yoán, they were like, why? Like, why not just learn French? And I'm like, because it's a totally different language. They're like, but if that way you can, you know, you can speak French in France and to all the, you know, like, wherever they speak French in the world, which is it's a language that's more widely spoken in the world, and you can talk to Haitian people in French and they understand you. And I'm like, bro, how fucked is that, to talk to, like, to negate a whole language,
right,
and speak to an entire population of people in the language of their oppressors, you know what I mean? That's so fucked up, you know? So that person really didn't get it. And I think that's kind of like the vibe that, you know, that I get. I mean, but with Monica, like, I'm kind of force her to speak Creole with me because I really want to learn. So, you know, right now we're, like, basic conversational, you know, that I, like, kind of impose. Mm-hmm. If I can say something, if I know that I can express an idea to her in Creole, like, I'm hungry, I'll do it in Creole instead of in English and instead of in Spanish, because I want her to clock me if it's wrong or correct my pronunciation or whatever, you know, like, it's learning a new language. Like,
and why do you want to know Creole? What is it that drives you toward this culture?
Dude, because, like I was telling you, it's like a full third of the culture that it, like, lives in my city there's the same way that there's people that don't speak English here, but all they speak is Spanish. People that don't speak Spanish, you know, have no line of communication with people that don't speak English. Like they just don't. So all the oral history that you could get from like interacting with a neighbor, it's just truncated, and it's like immediately before you can even start, because there's this like, you know, there's this language barrier, right? So I am trying to like minimize that language barrier for myself, because I love talking to people, and I love learning about people's like histories and their experiences and like their emotions, and like I just like love making friends. And that's really why, because, and I'm also like so passionate about this town, and I feel like it's super hypocritical to be like, oh, I'm fucking ride or die for Miami, and then like completely turn a blind eye to like these hundreds of thousands of people that like, you know, they just, you're never going to be able to communicate with them. But I have this problem too, like maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's just like this like crazy ambition. Like I would go into the library when I was a little kid. I was like a library rat when I was a kid. I was there all the time. And like the Blockbuster Video, and I would go to both of these places, and I would be like, you know, it was like this like overwhelming feeling of like, fuck, I'm never gonna be able to read all these books, you know, like I'm never gonna be able to like see all these movies, you know, all these like tapes, you know, I'm never gonna be able to get through all of them. And even now, like today I was working on a grant, and I have a bunch of other stuff to do, and sometimes when I feel this overwhelm, and I just panic because there's so many things to do. I'm like, oh, I'm never gonna be able to do any of this stuff, so then I just don't do any of it.
Right.
Anyway, that's kind of how I feel in terms of like all these potential like people that I could meet, and like all these potential connections that I could have in the city, that if I don't make my best effort to like, you know, speak the language, then I'll just really never be able to make those kinds of like connections with folks. And it's not like, it's not, for me, it's not an like really an ego thing, and it's not a financial thing. It's just like a I just want to talk to you thing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I actually wonder if this isn't to belittle that point at all. It's just I wonder if you think it's just practical to know to learn Creole. Like if you live in Miami, if you think that's practical or not. And I don't.
It depends where you are.
Right, exactly.
It depends where you are. Because if you're in Little Haiti or if you're in North Miami, there's places you can go that they don't speak English or Spanish there. They just speak Creole there. I mean, but how often do I find myself in those places? Not unless I seek it out.
Right.
But I also like am fully that person that works the polls every election, and they station me in different places every 2 years, you know. And I love like talking to regular people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, everyday people.
So, like, bus people, like, I love taking the bus, like, you know, like, everyday people are so cool, and, like, I probably am not gonna live in Little Haiti, and I'm probably not gonna live in North Miami, and I probably am not gonna take the jitney, but if there's ever a time, then I'll be, like, a little bit prepared. And, you know, just now I was making this movie over the summer, and this movie Mountains that you've been talking about, like, it's all in Haitian Kreyol. Like, we wrote it in English, but it's in Kreyol, so we translated it, and I would think like 70 or 80% of it is in Haitian Kreyol at the end of the day. And you know, like, producing that movie, like being on the ground in that neighborhood, and there's a lot of stuff that, you know, I had to go around and kind of like get signatures for like people filming in the street and talk to neighbors and do all that stuff. And, you know, it would have been different if I had gone in and like speaking English or speaking Spanish, you know.
Right.
But I have like a very basic understanding of Creole, so I'm able to go and speak in, you know, in the language, the like native language, and then people are like, oh, what? Yeah. What's this? You know? And then I can like translate, you know, going back into English, because I only speak like 5 or 6 sentences in Kreyol. You know?
Yeah, but still.
But it's different, you know. It's fun, and like I get to ask questions, and there's like an openness that I like really love that comes with that, you know. It's obviously like, you know, I guess if I like keep going too deep into this line of thinking, it gets like a little bit colonial and weird, which is why I'm just like happy to be here, and I'm happy to learn the language, and I'm happy to like make friends, but that's it, you know.
Well, it's interesting, right? Like I guess we don't have to go too deep into that, but I don't know. It's like, I guess, yes, you could pursue that route, and you could be like, oh, I'm learning this language so I can get these like consent signatures or whatever.
But that's not
obviously
right,
that's
not
exactly.
Why. Yeah.
And so I don't think that actually you could pursue that line very far.
Right.
You know, especially considering and this is okay. So like this is another thing that I have in mind. Like I, you know, everyone's different. Everyone has all these different motives, whatever. Some people don't have any motives. They're just doing what they think is cool, whatever.
Mm.
And that's, you know, leave that for their interview. But I think this is really important because like one of the reasons that I'm doing this stuff is because, you know, as you know, like I lived in New York for 3 years and I lived in LA for 6 years.
Yeah.
That 6th year I was half here, half there.
Mm.
But the point is just that when I was in LA, I wrote an article, and it was about like how race operated differently in LA than it did in Miami, or in other words, like to me as a Miamian,
yeah,
when I was in LA, I thought race was like really like a really solidified institution. Like these people live here and those people live there, and there wasn't very much of like there was like tolerance isn't even the word. It's just like it was like you could find exceptions to the rules, but you really had to look. Whereas I feel like, and then so what I was told by a couple of people as like pushback after publication was like, well, your case is special. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't agree with you, because the entire range of people that I'm thinking about are people that I went to like school with, people that I grew up with. Like, you know, it's not like that article has nothing to do with any theoretical books or anything. I'm just referencing real people,
right,
that I knew growing up that presented like, who expressed race, or rather, let me put it this way, who expressed multiple races at once. You
mean like performed?
Yeah, performed, expressed, gesture, however you want, like, and it wasn't a concept of like of appropriation or passing built in. Like this is a total hypothetical example, but if you were walking down the street and it was like the Calle Ocho festival, and there were some black dudes playing rumba, and then you started dancing, you know, and this actually it's not even that super hypothetical.
No, that happened like 6 weeks
ago. Yeah, well, I remember because that example probably came to mind because we were. But anyway, back to it. If you started dancing, or if I just started playing with them, no one would be like, look at these light-skinned people appropriating,
right?
You know. And vice versa, if like we went to like I don't know, something you can think of that has to do with whiteness, like that, what's the band Fleet Foxes?
Fleet Foxes, yeah.
Are they white?
What do you think?
Well, yeah, okay, sure. No one's gonna tell you, cause you're listening to Fleet Foxes. I couldn't tell if it was Fleet of, but it like Fleet Foxes, like no one's gonna be like, oh, look at this guy passing for white,
right?
You know, which is a different form of appropriation, in a sense, right?
Right.
And so, like, when
haciéndose blanquito.
Yeah, and so, like, the terms do exist, right? Like, that phrase. But, I mean, you can, hacer whatever.
Exactly.
Haciéndose bobo, haciéndose this or that, whatever. Yeah. But it just seems like, and I'm definitely not trying to say that people in Miami can't be racist. You know, we just talked about Anti-Blackness because you're learning Haitian Kreyol, you know, and the associations.
Yeah.
But I just meant in that article that, like, I grew up like, oh, look at this, like, tan Chinese guy who has a Jamaican accent. Okay, yeah, normal.
Yeah.
You know, oh, look at this white, quote, white guy whose dad's from Cuba, his mom's from Argentina, he was born in Mexico City.
Right.
You know, like, all of these things that express multiple origins, that basically just signify in multiple and in fact contradictory ways.
Yeah.
You know? And I feel like in the other places that I've lived, people like kind of double down on one identity, and they're just like, so like, you know, like if they're like Mexican and,
I feel you.
Yeah, so my point is this, and I am definitely confusing, not on purpose, like ethnicity and race.
Yeah.
But I just mean like, let's take away those terms, and I just mean like identity markers.
Yeah.
You know, like physical and cultural identity markers. Like,
are you saying that in Miami we allow ourselves to be more intersectional?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't think it has anything to do with whether you're physically intersectional or not. Like I don't think that you have to have a particular level of melanin in Miami to do like something that someone in Boston would think of as black. You know, or vice versa. No, not vice versa. I don't know why I said that.
Sure.
But this is the question. This is more like an intuition. It's not like a fact, you know? I just know that I've had experiences where, I don't know, where it just seems like there's so much mixture. And again, I'm not saying that people that are mixed or that do or perform mixed things cannot be racist. They absolutely can be racist. But it just seems like this idea of like separation is different when people interact on a like face-to-face basis, you know, or person-to-person basis. Like, how can I say this? Like, or let me help me out here.
But you know what, Yoán? Like, I definitely see where you're going with this. I see the hypothesis, but I have to tell you, like, you know, that in Miami, it's just, I mean, it's, I don't know, I haven't lived in LA as long as you've lived in LA, so, I mean, I haven't spent as much time there as you, but, you know, this city is very segregated as well.
Sure.
And, you know, you hear terms like el barrio de los negros, eso es de negro, peste a negro, all these kinds of things, like, are like, they're still hanging in the air in this room from when someone like said it like a few hours ago when they walked out, you know what I mean? Like, that's in my family. Like, those things are real. Like, those things are real to us, like you and me in this town. So, you know, there's still, maybe like in our generation, if I'm like dancing in like una rumba, someone in the street won't tell me, or someone our age won't tell me. But, you know, if I'm like, for Christ's sake, like one of my aunts was here, you know, a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, ¿y la película? And I was like, bien, ahí, we're almost done, this and that. I'm doing it. She's like, pero me dijeron que es de negro, que es de prieto. That's what she said. Pero me dijeron que, I don't know how you're going to translate that.
No, I'm not going to translate anything.
Pero me dijeron que es de prieto. I'm like, es de una familia haitiana que vive aquí en Miami. She's like, ay, hijo, ¿por qué no hace? ¿Cuándo vas a hacer una película de blanco? I'm like, she's like, ¿por qué no? I'm like, this is why.
This is my question.
You know?
Does she think that you're white?
Yeah.
Okay. And do you think that you're white?
I have no idea. Yes, but also no, because like I was telling you at the top of the show, you know what I mean?
At the
like,
top of the show?
I was telling you at the top of the show, like, you know, there's no documentation, you know, like, I definitely I'm not out here like saying the N-word anymore, mind you.
Right, yeah. Yes.
As of like 6 or 7 years ago, by the way, you know?
Yeah, that's about right. Because for context, like, people grow up here, Latin people grow up here, saying the N-word as if we were black.
Right.
And so, and this is kind of related to the question of whether you're white or not. I mean, because again, like, 45 minutes ago, you told me a story about how you weren't white when you were in Boston.
Right.
you know? And then now that we're talking about, like, your experiences with Haitian people, maybe your whiteness, quote-unquote whiteness, is a little bit more... or your relative whiteness is definitely there.
Oh, yeah, it's more amplified for sure.
Entonces, it is, like, a very relational kind of situation, but I think that has to do more with, like, people who are, quote, in the middle, or whatever, right? Damn, I lost my train of thought again. But this question of, like, whiteness and being there, do you think that the same question exists backwards? Do you think that there's a relational level of blackness that you have? Because I recently told someone, I was drinking, but I recently was like, yeah, you already know. The conversation was moving, and I was like, you know, I was trying to really get at this, like, kernel of, like, experience growing up here. And the way it came out was like this. And for the record, like, I don't have dark skin at all. I was like, I want to know at what point I stopped or realized that I wasn't black. Because it's not like and I mean, this is getting more into my story than your story, but this idea of, like, number one, growing up around a lot of black people, in my case. Number two, basically just not like not having, like, a white person around, you know, like your neighbor Pat in this case, like, not really having, like, a set of white people to be like, oh yeah, I'm one of them, kind of, right? Which, depending on who, I mean, I don't really think I mesh with that anyway, but it really depends. And so, but it's this question of this, like, growing up here, there's definitely black people growing up here, and then there's definitely non-black people growing up here. But I'm, like, hard-pressed to think of, like, white people, especially in large numbers. There's always, like, oh, my neighbor Pat, or oh, my neighbor Wes, you know, but I didn't have a neighbor Wes until I moved over here. Because when I used to live over there on 137th, Southwest and 66th, there was no white people over there. You know, there was, in that sense. You got somebody with him?
Yeah. That's so funny. This is my mom. Oh, okay. First of all, this is a perfect example of like, I want to talk to you about this thing, like the concept of la visita.
Yeah.
Hacer la visita. But we talk about that later. But
well, no, just
everybody has a key to this place, and like this is like an open door.
Your house.
My house, yeah, my house.
So privacy's not
huge here. But to go back to like, you were asking about this like, I guess about like, what did you say, relational blackness or something like that? Like my,
yeah, relational whiteness, relational blackness, like just. Really what I'm interested in is, like, I wonder if the, like, Miamians relate to each other in ways that are, like, racially fluid.
Yeah.
That's basically my thing. And I when I say my thing, I mean it's what I intuit, it's what I wonder. It's like yeah, that's the question. Like,
I think in some ways yes, and in most ways no.
Okay.
Because, you know, like the way that I was raised, like there was always like a divide, you know, there was like a barrier, like a wall, like yeah, like I was saying, like even with music, I remember like when we were kids, like the like cool music that you had to like listen to in order to have like cred in school, or to like not be called a faggot in school, was like you had to like listen to rap and this and that. I mean, it goes back to this like American idea of like, you know, what's cool, what's urban, what's like, you know, cultural production is like, you know, it's like black people have contributed so much to like American cultural production, and it's so cool to be that. But then it's also like at home it's different. At home, like you shouldn't be or something like that. I mean, it's very complicated. I would never be like, oh, I'm black. First of all, because I think that it's like living in America, it means something totally different than it does in like the countries that we come from. And I think it's like almost disrespectful. It's disrespectful to the black experience to claim blackness like being the color that I am.
Right.
You know, having said that, like if we're going by the fucking 1-drop rule, you know, you do the math, but like I would never say that, you know. But like.
But what do you mean when you say like it means something different here than it means in our country?
In Cuba, like people shout at me from across the street like mulatto, which like nobody would ever fucking call me mulatto here. You know what I mean? Like never. You know, or like negro or like stuff like that. Like, I mean, they call my dad that. Like, you know, my dad's like maybe a shade darker than me, if that. You know. Mm-hmm. I think it's just like it just means something different because we don't have the same, you know, like collective cultural understanding or construction like of race in Cuba. That's such a complicated issue that I don't know a lot about yet. But I know it's treated so differently. Like, even just from my own experience being there and my own experience being here, even though there's, like, definitely, you know, like, cultural constructs in terms of, like, the way that people racially relate to each other in Cuba, it's, like, obviously, like, much looser in the vernacular, and in the way that, like, we like embody it, we represent it, we experience it, we view it. It's different than the way that it is here. I can't like expand much more on it than that, except for you know, just like my perception of it. But yeah.
Do you feel like it's hard to expand on it because you like lack a vocabulary to do so?
I think so. I also think that I lack like a lot of the like historical context, you know, because like I know that there's like I'm like pretty well aware of Black history in the United States. Like I'm pretty well versed in Black history in the United States, but Black history in Cuba is different because it's not something that's discussed in the same way or delineated in the same way. And I think even, you know, like to give you an example, like, you know, we have this like cultural icon, this like war hero from, you know, Cuban, storied hero of Cuban history, like Antonio Maceo, right? Mm-hmm. And everybody kind of knows that he was Black. I was dating someone in like 2012 who, while I was taking like a Caribbean studies class at FIU, the school that we went to, and she would like come to audit the class sometimes with me and just hang out. And she's from Cuba. She left Cuba when she was like 8 or something like that. She learned all about Maceo back at home, and somehow she missed the fact that he was Black. She found out in my class when she was 21, you know what I mean? She was like, what? So like race is just like not something that's discussed in the same way in our country. Like thinking about how like you could overlook that or you could forget about that if she ever learned it, that's crazy, because, you know, the way that we do it in the United States is there's obviously like such a like, I think it was me, such a you know, a complicated like violent history of slavery and racism that we confront every day. There is in Cuba too, but it's confronted in a different way. But here, you know, it's like so pronounced that like the skin color of like a like huge like top 5 national heroes of all time like would absolutely never be overlooked in this country, right, the way that it might have been for her.
Do you think, because I think this is just a word, overlooked, do you think things like that get overlooked, rightly or wrongly, in Miami? And specifically, I want to say, like, not even in Miami. Like, I guess I'm really zeroing in on, like, Miamians. And I might even be zeroing in on, like, Miamians born in the 90s.
Okay, go off.
You know, like, this is the question, like, how many times have you been like, I'm going to hang out with this person. Oh, no, their skin is this color. I can't hang out with them. I would imagine 0.
Yeah, 0.
Exactly. I have the same experience. And so, like, and it's to the point where, like, I remember learning about, like, when I was at FIU, my major was in English, and all of my American credits were in African-American literature.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't, like, read Hemingway and Faulkner and shit like that. And even though there's, like, black people in Faulkner or whatever, it's a whole thing there. Allegedly, right? Because I'm not versed in those literatures.
Yeah.
But I remember, like, learning about black history in these... Basically, I learned about black history from black people.
Mm.
Through these novels, through these narratives, and from professors who were black, Caribbean,
mm-hmm.
And it was really, like, at that point that I started to, like, see, like, just to see myself in the world, like, in the United States, because until, like, I had, like, read those things. It's not that I'm not trying to say that, like, I was racist and then I read those things and I was like, oh, I'm not racist anymore. No.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I frequently, and I think almost always, overlooked these things that you keep saying, like, are important, right? Like you say, if you study the national heroes in this country, there's no way you're going to overlook their skin color.
Right.
And I feel like when I was growing up, and it probably has something to do with my family, because my immediate family, like, doesn't say stuff like that, you know? Like, I could hear, like, my mom's grandparents saying stuff like that. You know, like, betanero or whatever, stuff like that. But in my immediate family, actually, there was nothing like that. And I had black friends, and my dad had black friends, and there was, like, I'm telling you, there was, like, black people in my life.
Yeah.
And so, and maybe it's because of those things, like, maybe it is a unique...
Maybe. I think it's also different because your parents have a different level of education maybe as well, and like your parents are artists kind of too.
Well, my mom's a paralegal. She's like a secretary that became a paralegal.
Yeah, but she's dope.
No, I'm not saying she's not dope. I'm just saying, like, but I know what you mean, but I think that impetus would, like, come from my paternal side, just to be, like, because what I'm trying to do with these interviews is, like, I want to get at concrete things. You know, like, not abstractions. Like, oh, your parents, that's like an abstraction.
Yeah.
Which one?
Right.
You know what I mean? And I know it's, like, a little bit maniacal.
No, but that's fine.
But that's kind of what happens, you know? Like, when you don't get into specifics, like, in concrete things, you start to, like, gloss over things. Like, for example, people tell you, like, why would you learn Haitian Kreyol when you could learn French?
Right.
French is spoken in... Well, I don't actually know where French is spoken, but I assume French is spoken in blah, 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 so exactly. It's more useful. And, like, that kind of abstraction, it's like, versus you're coming at them and being like, well, this language is actually around me, you know? Maybe not every day, like you say, but the fact of the matter is that it is around you.
Yeah.
At some points, you know? And you can make the choice to engage with it because it's there.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is that you don't feel like that's not for you. You know what I mean? Like, the idea that you could make a movie about a Haitian family, you don't feel like, oh, yeah, I can't touch that.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not doing it on my own.
Of course, right.
I'm doing it with, like, I wrote it with a Haitian person, you know? And she's speaking, in the film, she's speaking to, like, the specificity of the Haitian experience, and I'm speaking to the specificity of, like, my emotional experience, like, being first generation, and that's what the story's about, and, like, change and place, and my family, my dad, like, you know, and, like, the experience of immigrant, of, like, being an immigrant kid or whatever, you know? So, like, I'm coming at it from that position, but if I didn't have, like, a creative collaborator that was from that culture and could speak to that culture, like, I absolutely would not touch this story, you know what I mean? I would tell the story, but from a different perspective, like in a different community.
Yeah, and I take what you're saying. It's important. I take this into account. But what I'm trying to get at is not that, like, it's not at the level of like. It's not even at the level of responsible storytelling. I'm like one step before that. I'm talking about the idea that you would even want. That you're even like, you're driven to approach something like this. I want to know where that comes from. Like, the you hear Haitian Kreyol and you're like, oh, I wonder where I can take classes. You know, you hear like Mambo or whatever, you're, oh yeah, I want to approach that. Like where does that orientation of openness come from? That's really what I know is within me, and what I have so far just attributed to being from a place where, like, I think you have to be open by virtue of the fact that you don't know what you're gonna get.
You know what I think it is, Yoán? It's like, I really think it... I hate to say it, man. I really think, like, some of it comes from... like having issues with authority.
Okay.
You know?
I see what you're saying.
Because I know that for you, and for me, we have this, like, openness and this curiosity. For the generation that is right before us is not the same for me, and the generation before that is certainly not the same. So, you know, I love the idea of, like, my aunt coming over, like I was telling you, and her questioning, like, my motives, and me being like, you know, this is what I choose to do because of the way that you are interacting with it. Like, the thing is, like, I feel like, you know, I'm also looking at things from, like, a perspective of, like, where my kids are gonna be at, and, like, where I want, like, which generational like curses I, like, am committed to, like, stopping with me, and, like, not giving life to continue down the line, and, like, the kind of this, like, specific kind of, like, racism against, like, people that basically come from the same region that we do, just because of the color of someone's skin, or, like, the way that they speak. Like, it's the norm, and I tend to, like, rebel against things that are just assumed normal. And so I think a lot of it might come from that as well, of, like, you know, yeah, I'm gonna tell a story that's rooted in this community because, you know, why hasn't it been done? Why are people telling me that it's not gonna make money? Well, I'll fucking make it, and I'll show them that it can make money, and it can be universal, and it can be this and that. Like, I got an email 2 days ago from someone that was like, this movie's not gonna make any money. Okay, fine. Why do you have to say that? You know what I mean? Like, fuck you. Like, I'm gonna prove to you that, yes, there's an audience for this, and people want to know about Haitian stories, and people, you know what I mean? Like, and, you know, fuck you. Like, I can speak Creole because... why not? Because, you know, because why wouldn't you? You know what I mean? Like, I think, like, a lot of it for me is that, like, you know, whenever I brush up against something that tells me that I can't do something, like, you know, it's like this, like, rebeldia is like, you know, I will do it. And, you know, I'm not like a particularly, like, combative person, and I'm not, like, a very, like, competitive person, but those are just things that, like, cosas que yo me guardo, que they don't, if something doesn't sit right with me, I'm not just gonna kind of, like, let it fly. I'm gonna do, you know, very calmly and very rationally, whatever. I'm just gonna take the position that I'm gonna take. And when you get into making films, like, it gets a little bit more complicated than, like, learning the language, in terms of, like, the politics of it, because, like, with film, like, I'm like a huge fan of this filmmaker Haile Gerima, and he made all these movies in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and he talks about, he was a professor of film at Howard University for a long time, and he talks about how cinema is a weapon, and white supremacy it's been cinema has been the vehicle that white supremacy's most powerful vehicle, in terms of its procreation, and so we have me and all the people that I make movies with now, this creative collective that I'm a part of, and all my peers and whatever, we have this idea of okay, well, if cinema is a weapon, then we have to use it to combat all the harm that's been done for the first 100 years of its existence. Exactly. So in the same way that I'm learning Creole because fuck you, I'm learning Creole because I want to, I'm making this movie because because fuck you. That's why. You know what I mean? I mean that's a very simple way of saying what I mean, but it's kind of it's actually a pretty accurate vocabulary.
This is what's interesting to me. And I'm gonna phrase this in a very particular way, because it's what you want to do, and it comes from this rebellious thing. It's all this bad shit from back in the day, right? The white supremacy and all these things and stuff like that. And but what's so interesting about it is that it's specifically manifesting as an anti-white supremacist project. Whether it's learning Haitian Kreyol because you value it and you value the people who speak it, because you don't want, if you could, when you're working at the poll, help someone who can't speak English or Spanish, if you could, then you want to.
Yeah.
And that means you value those people. And so whether it's learning the Haitian Kreyol or making the movie, it's interesting that the project is an anti-white supremacist project. And what's really interesting to me about it is the fact that you're talking about fuck you, I'm gonna do this. And it reminds me of Reynaldo Arenas, who was my work is my fucking revenge on the world. Fuck you people. This is the story, blah, blah, blah. So what's so interesting about it is that such a personal notion as rebellion and revenge is coming out as an anti-white supremacist project, but you're not black, right? And how does it happen that your sense of rebellion is helping this collective? And what I'm kind of getting at is I feel like that too in musical projects, and I know a lot of people that I know are like that in their musical projects. A couple people I know that I've talked to about this. And so it becomes really interesting to me how those two things mix, because basically in plain language, if you're not if you benefit to some degree from white supremacy because you're not let's say indisputably black, right? Or even debatably black, then how is it that your revenge, your approach, your desire, such a personal thing, how is it that it manifests that way? How is...
Okay.
You know what I'm trying
to... I feel you, but there's something that you're saying that is a little bit of a fallacy, because...
Yeah, tell me.
This but you're not black, that's kind of white supremacy is not the antithesis of blackness, it's not, it's it's an antithesis to humanity. It touches more than just black people. White supremacy affects you and I. It affects...
But how does it affect
affects
us?
white people too. White supremacy affects white people too, you know what I mean? It's and I know, and this is something that's difficult to fit into the purpose of these interviews for you, in terms of finding a tangible villain, right? Or like something to tangibly express, like, you know, like the reasons behind like our actions or our cultures, or, you know, what have you. I mean, what you've been expressing, that is like part of the process of this interview series and this research project. But, you know, I don't know. Some days I think it's a coincidence. Some days I think it's not. You know, like, in a tangible way, like, white supremacy affects me because, you know, it makes its way into the way that we live our lives. Like, people told me, my parents told me, you know, that I couldn't hang out at Churchill's when I was 18 years old. I was like, I'm fucking 18. Like, you can't tell me what to do, you know? Like, they could, obviously. And when I have an 18-year-old, I'll probably tell them the same, you know, similar in things in the similar vein, but not for the same reason, and probably not the same shit, you know what I mean? But, you know, it's like, no puedes ir a barrio los negros, no puedes hacer esto, no puedes hacer... Like, you know, these are limitations that are placed on us socially by this, like, institution of white supremacy that tells us that, you know, the darker the color of your skin, the more dangerous you are to be around, which I think is bullshit, you know?
How did you come to think that? And do you think you would have come to think that
a lot of
living
different
in another city?
ways? Yeah, probably. Because the thing is, like, you know, I'm like, I just, you know, this, it's always been my problem, is like just being like such an optimist about things, you know? It's like always been my issue. And I'm just like sit around and I'm like, there's no way. You know what I mean? And that rears its ugly head because I like excuse things that people do because I'm like, they don't know. There's no way that if they knew, and that's not true because there's fucked up people in the world, and I kind of like refuse to believe that.
Yeah.
Because it'll like really fuck with me and throw off like just like my fundamental being, you know what I mean? If I really let in the fact that like people might not be fundamentally good, like that's really gonna fuck with me. So like I'm not ready to deal with that. But you know, yeah, like I just like it can't be true, you know.
Can we pause on that for a second, because at the very beginning of this, you talked about like a square footage thing and like how here you're like, you know, all the 3 lots and stuff. You said there's like a set of people who are driven to isolate, to move away. And I assume you're not one of those people, since you've talked about loving community and like whatever, all this stuff and people visiting. Do you think that those two things are related?
Mm-hmm.
That love of community, do you think it like is related to that optimism, the fundamental belief that like people are good?
Yeah.
And the reason I pause on this is because like there's a guy named Antonio Maceo who wrote a book called The Repeating Island.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things that he points out, and in like the introduction to the book, I believe, he's like, you know, Caribbean people, like, we're not apocalyptic. Like, we don't think about like that anything is the end of the world. You know, like, and so when I hear you talk about that optimism, obviously I think about myself. I'm like, yeah, I'm like that too, you know, because you don't want to accept, you know, that there are people maybe you need to walk away from, or things like that would cause you to isolate, you know, and to sort of just contribute to like a violence of leaving people and like abandoning things and this kind of stuff. And what do you think about that idea? Like, do you think that's a Caribbean idea or not? Like,
yeah, man, for sure. Like I told you earlier, I really want to talk to you about like the concept of like la visita, hacer visita. It's like a huge thing for me. Like, people were always coming in and out of my house, specifically my grandparents' house. Like, no call, nothing, just like knocking on the door, show up, hey, we're here, and now we have to entertain these people for a few hours. You know what I mean? Until they decide to leave.
Well, continue. Just talk to me about it.
I mean, I love that idea. Like, I love the. I'm dating somebody right now that is from Nicaragua, but he's like us. Like, he was born here and he was taken to live over there for a few years, and now he lives here again.
That's how my dad was. He was born in New York, raised in Colombia.
Right.
Brought him back.
Exactly. And I'm this is like a point that I'm bringing up like for our future as like a point of like, you know, damn, like we need to be on the same page about this, because when and now I'm airing out his business, but I doubt he'll ever listen to this or read this, so it's fine. He like really feels deeply uncomfortable with like someone just showing up at their house, you know what I mean? Whereas me, like, literally during this interview, someone just showed up at my house. Granted, It was my mom, but, like, it was fine, you know what I mean? Like, I'm used to it. Like I was saying, there's an open door policy, but, like, he's like, if you don't call me or text me before and I'm not expecting you, like, it's gonna really fuck with him, you know? So...
You think that's different because he's Nicaraguan?
No, I think that's different because... he and I have a different... He's 36. He and I have a different rate of acceleration when it comes to, like, assimilating to American culture and Americanness, right? So, like, I think, like, he's more, like, American than me, you know?
See, these are the kind of qualities that I'm interested in, like, discovering.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we fall into the danger of, like, abstracting again. Like, oh, you feel like that? I feel like that, too. That must be a thing, right?
Yeah.
But, you know, what are you going to do at the end of the day? But regardless, sorry. So, La Visita comes
you're fine.
And they show up and you just got to entertain them.
No, and it's fine. And they're welcome. That's the thing, Yoán. Like, you know, like, and I think that's a huge, like, way that's not commercial, that we as, you know, Latin and Caribbean people have been able to, like, you know, hold on to our like, you know, like our traditions and our like way of life is like haciendo la visita. And the fact that that's like just like being lost, like with every generation, like we do it less, is like something that I kind of lament in a way. And which is also why I encourage like people to come over at any time, and why I show up at like my goddaughter's house at whatever time of day or night without texting or calling, because I'm like, I want to be part of that like cultural tradition. But I know that I can't do it, not even at my boyfriend's house, you know what I mean? I can't just show up without telling him I'm coming over, you know?
Which is, well, let me not weigh in on
no,
that's great.
We'll talk, yeah.
But yeah, no, it's there's definitely like cultural differences, and but again, it's just like things like this.
But I think it goes back to like I was saying, like there's like an accelerated process of like becoming assimilated to American culture, and like this like idea of space, personal space, more space, like you know, like this like the aspiration to acquire, the aspiration to like leave the nest, the aspiration to like get your own space, move out your own place. Like, what are you gonna do in a house that like by you and one other person in a 3-bedroom house by yourselves? Nothing. Like, you know, I love like having people around me. I love having my family around me. Like, you know, and this gets dicey because when you think about it in terms of like in like contextually, in terms of like the way that homes were like nationalized in communist countries and stuff like that, and like people are made to live together, it gets a little bit weird, right, when you think about that. But
well, of course not everyone would have that thought.
Sure,
you have that thought because you have the Cuban background.
Exactly,
you know?
Yeah, exactly. But
I have a question really quick, which is
me.
like this like accelerated pathway to like assimilation. I think earlier you said that Miami is kind of a place where that's like slowed down to some degree.
I think so, yeah.
And
or it can be. If you choose.
Yeah. So tell me about this choice, like, because I know what you're talking about, because my sister and me are different.
Yeah.
My cousins and I are different. In terms of like our quote unquote assimilation, you know, like a lot of stuff in my family, they might be like, well, you're going the other way.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And by the other way, of course, I mean like embracing practices that are Cuban, and then in their origin even African. Of course, like there are a couple of things about like that statement, which is that like some things that like rumba, for example, has people be like, oh, that's like a black thing, but there's actually elements in it that are Southern Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
But what is Southern Spain? Was for 700 years it was a Muslim.
Moors.
The Moors, it was a Muslim area, you know. And then why was that? Well, because like 110 years before that there was a revolution in Saudi Arabia, right. You know. Entonces, like, and that's nothing. Like, there's all kinds of mixes and all this kind of shit. So, like, but when people say stuff like, oh, you're going the other way, which no one says to me. But if they were to say it, that would be how they would phrase it, you know? Like, the most they'll say, like, is like, my mom's mom will be like, you know, like, oh, no, don't get involved in that. You know? Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so,
I know what you're saying. And
so, like, don't get involved in that. It's like, to me, it's an interesting phrase because I'm like, don't you understand that I was always involved in it?
Right.
Like, it's always been in my context, in my world. It's like when people tell you, like, oh, don't get involved in, like, learning Haitian Kreyol. It's like, dude, literally, the only reason I even thought, and now I'm putting words in your mouth and you correct me, but, like, the only reason you might even think that learning Haitian Kreyol is a possibility or even remotely useful is because it is.
Right.
Because it's there. And you're like, huh. This is a part of the world that, like, the question of access is, like, flipped.
Yeah.
You know, some people, you might be thinking, like, oh, these people, they can't speak English or Spanish. They're stuck in Creole. But you might also think, hold on. I'm stuck.
Right.
I can't talk to them.
Yeah. I
am the one who has an access issue here.
Yeah.
You know?
It's true.
And that's, like...
And what a beautiful opportunity you have.
You know, and it's and the thing about Miami, the reason I'm starting this project is because I think Miami is the place that presents these opportunities.
Yeah.
And you know, and like obviously unfortunately there's no like anti-Miami to explore, like a perfect opposite Miami, you know, to like explore the world where Robert Colom doesn't make a video about the Haitian people participating in the change of their own neighborhood because they're forced to work. But he actually makes a film about the developers. Right. You know, the amazing developers that are just going to bring up the neighborhood and, like, you know, they're creating jobs.
But here's the crazy part, Yoán. Like, people are out here in Miami making that movie.
Yeah, I bet somebody has, yes.
You know?
Like,
so maybe Miami is the antithesis of itself.
It could be.
You know,
it could be.
This is the place that's perfectly opposite of itself too, because the choice, like I'm saying, the choice is very real.
I agree with you. I think that painting Miami as like a battleground essentially for these choices is really important, because that is exactly what I'm talking about when I say, like, you know, when I talk about like the multiplicity or fluidity of like race. Experience and expression. You know, someone can call you a name, someone can call you a color, someone else calls you a different color, and then you're like, okay, my experience of race is plural. I have been labeled multiple things. And then also expression is multiple, right? You can't control what other people are calling you, but you can certainly control the way you express. So, like, for me, something that Miami offers is like, hey, you grew up in a place where, like, there's, like, this multiplicity. So, what happens if you express in accordance with that multiplicity? You know? And that's not to say, like you're playing a role. It just means that you allow yourself the openness to identify with something with anything, really. You know, like, I think that the speaking of Haitian and the learning and the desire to learn Haitian Kreyol is a great example of this. Because, like, what have you been doing for 300 days straight? You know, maybe you used the streak freeze once or twice, right?
Yeah, maybe more than a few times if I'm honest.
But the point is, like, you're choosing, and I know this is not a racial thing per se, but it is 100% tied to race, as you know from people who've tried to dissuade you from doing this.
Yeah.
And as you know from just, you know who speaks Haitian Kreyol, at least in the majority.
Yeah.
And so, like, it demonstrates a choice, right? Like, okay, I'm gonna learn this. And maybe you're not thinking about it in these terms, but at the end of the day, it does add up to making you a more plural person.
Yeah, but don't crystallize me. Like, don't, like, you know, just don't be like, oh, you're so amazing because you're learning Creole. You know what I mean?
I didn't say you're amazing.
Okay, don't do that. Don't do that, because tampoco it's not such a stretch. You know what I mean?
No. Yeah, I don't want to be misinterpreted. I'm like I've been trying to say throughout the thing. Like, I think I've said a couple of times, like, it's not that people in Miami can't be racist. It's not that, like, it's not that you can't or I can't have a racist thought while I'm learning something that is, like, let's say, black in its origins, right? It's all these things can happen, and they do happen, right? But I'm so interested in Miami as, like, this space of choice.
Yeah.
Because what I saw in Los Angeles, in my personal opinion, was like, there is no choice.
Yeah.
You keep that shit at home, and when you come outside,
right,
you do like the white people do,
right,
and that's it. English is the standard, and, you know, all these kinds of things, and here, like, you could literally walk up to someone and choose what fucking language you're gonna engage in, and then the ball's in their court.
Yeah.
You know, and that's happened to me a million times.
Yeah,
you
happens
know,
to
like,
me every day.
Every day it happens, you know, and so it's these kind of choices that, like, I'm coming to realize in the course of this, like, conversation that are really, like, what Miami kind of has to offer, I think, you know, because you can get away with it. Like, the what do they call it? The short and dirty of it is, like, you could walk out of here, not speak a word of English, you get away with it.
Yeah, you can.
You can not be black and say the N-word and get away with it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying in every context, but I'm saying that exists.
Yeah.
You know? But what's crazy about it is that it's not like the sensation, in my opinion, you tell me, like specifically about speaking Spanish or English, it's not that you're getting away with something.
It just is.
It's just what it is. Like, it's a weird, like, it's almost like, oh, I put on my right shoe instead of my left shoe first. Whatever.
Right. Exactly.
I'm wearing them both anyway, so it's like, so this is kind of what I mean, like, or what I'm trying to explore, and, like, obviously, like, the way, you know, like, it's, I just want to get as many perspectives, because everyone's going to give me a different perspective, you know. Your friend Monica, if I have the chance and privilege of interviewing her, she's not going to be like, oh yeah, the N-word's fine, it's cool, and, like, most likely she's not going to be like, yeah, it's cool when Latin people use the N-word, I don't care, you know. And because she's black is why I'm saying that, right? And because we're in the US, like, and even if we weren't,
she would be a really interesting person for you to talk to, because, like, it's just really, we apply for grants together all the time, and we have to answer questions about our race, ethnicity, heritage, whatever, all the time. And, you know, she just has a very interesting outlook, you know. She's a person that, like, deeply identifies with the Black American experience. You know, and but, like, also Haiti's a Latin country, but people don't really
think of it that way. So that shapes her identity as, like, a Latin person, which she doesn't really, she kind of, like, understands that she is, but she also doesn't really, like, claim. It's, like, it's so interesting, that stuff. Like, I love talking to her about that stuff. So yeah, she would be great for you to talk to too. I think it would be a totally different perspective. I mean, she also grew up in, like, a completely different part of town. But yeah, sorry, yeah. Anyway, you know, this is a really fucking complicated place, and I think that we bring our complications from the places that we come, and we all serve them here daily to each other, and we're all, like, forced to consume them. And I think that Miami is an interesting place because it's a place where all this stuff collides on a daily basis, and it's a place that doesn't really have the kinds of tangible answers that you're looking for. And I think the search for that is so beautiful and Sisyphean
and I'm all about it.
Well, yeah, we'll leave it there because there's nowhere to go.
There's nowhere to go.
You just said there's no tangible answers.
But yeah.
All right. Well. Yeah.